Hi again, and welcome to today's webinar, Solve Summer 2020 Meltdown. I hope you're all well and your spirits are high. I'm Kirk Daulerio, co-founder of AdmitHub. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're a student impact platform powered by behavioral science and AI. A bit about my background: I spent over 20 years in higher and secondary education. Prior to AdmitHub, I worked in college admissions at 3 different institutions. I was a high school counselor, and I spent some time as Director of Member Relations for the Common App. I'm joined today by the amazing Dawn Medley, the Associate Vice President for Enrollment Management at Wayne State University. And Dawn, I'll pass the mic over to you for an introduction.
Thanks, Kirk. As he said, I am the Associate Vice President of Enrollment Management here at Wayne State. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Wayne State, we are a research-one institution in the heart of Detroit. We have around 27,000 students. About 17,000 of those are undergraduate. We have a law school, pharmaceutical school, medical school, so a whole wide variety of students. The majority of our students come to us from within the local area, which is the city of Detroit and Michigan proper. And so I'm just excited to be with you and talking about, AdmitHub, our partnership in Wayne State today.
Thanks, Dawn. Just a quick note on questions and answers. We'll leave time for discussion and Q&A at the end. But note that you may ask questions at any time in the Q&A section or in the chat section as well. And you can ask those questions to either all panelists or all panelists and attendees. We'll hope to cover as many as possible, time permitting. And as we get started, I'd like to set the stage for what you're going to learn about today. We're going to start off with some of the techniques that we've proven to reduce summer melt. Dawn will take us through Wayne State's enrollment challenges, which I'm sure are similar at many of your institutions as well, and how she and her team successfully enrolled the largest and most diverse class in school history. Then we'll share data and insights from AdmitHub's COVID-19 Support Chatbots, which are active at more than 150 universities across the country. This includes top questions students are asking right now, what they're most concerned about, and some recommendations we're able to pull from that data to help schools support their students during this trying time. And we'll discuss how the coronavirus might impact summer melt this season and ways we can all shift to avoid a summer meltdown. So again, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A feature at any time, and we'll leave time at the end to discuss. But without further ado, let's kick it off. So as we all know, the student journey is not linear. When you break it down, there are an overwhelming number of steps that students need to take from the time they're admitted through the first day of classes. And through partnering with hundreds of institutions and messaging over 2 million students with our AI-powered chatbots, we've identified some of the top barriers to enrollment and strategies proven by randomized control trials, otherwise known as RCTs, which are the gold standard for scientific research studies in order to reduce melt. So Dawn, I want to pass it over to you to tell us more about your story at Wayne State and how you enrolled this largest and most diverse class in school history.
Okay, thanks. Well, gosh, I love that picture. That's back when we were all on campus. So I'm sure as many of you, you're at home in your home offices, and we're trying to figure out what does fall look like and what are we doing this summer. So let me set the stage for you. A couple years ago, 2008, we were really hoping to increase our fall incoming class. And so, as I stated earlier, we're in Detroit, Michigan. If you have read anything about the demographics in the Midwest, if you have been an enrollment manager or an admissions person for longer than a week and a half, you know that we are facing a declining birth rate, which also means a declining graduation rate. So the competition for students, not only in the Midwest, but particularly in Michigan, is really, really fierce. We all are facing, especially now in light of COVID, constrained budgets. We are working with, not necessarily having all the staff members we'd like to be able to do a job and to follow up. There are increasing complexities with financial aid. And so all of those things kind of converged, and we were really pushing to figure out how we could increase our incoming freshman class. And so what was really exciting was fall 2018, in the midst of all of those barriers and all of those struggles, Wayne State brought in our largest freshman class in history. We had 3,038 students. And that's not because any other institutions in the state of Michigan just gave up. It's because we were able to be competitive. And I highlight those other schools in the state of Michigan because they have amazing enrollment management folks and admissions folks. And so fall 2019, they all upped their game and they came. And so we were able to enroll our second biggest freshman class in fall 2019. And as everybody knows in the land of enrollment management, it's not what have you done, but it's what have you done for me lately. And so I know that fall 2020 is going to be even more pressure. And so, you know, we've kind of doubled down on our belief in what artificial intelligence and what the chatbot does for us. And so I was really excited to get to talk with you all about that. So next slide, yeah. So one of the things as we're going through and we're talking that have helped us when it comes to enrollment management in Wayne State and bringing in the class is making sure that we have centralized support. And so I know a lot of you have kind of those one-stop shops, and some of us have actually taken to referring to those as first-stop shops, because if we say one-stop, students are disappointed. We also have a lot of focus on what we call our next step engagement. So how do we nudge students in that process to prevent summer melt? So are we talking with them about orientation or housing? How are we getting them through that financial aid verification process? How are we helping them accept their loans? Then we always go to the next stage where we talk about, you know, what is the student's intent to enroll? How are we doing surveys to where we know the student has already decided they're going to go to Pirate University, and so I can let them go on to Pirate, and I can focus over here on students who may be considering me along with a couple of other institutions. Also, how can we do those surveys in a way that we get students' responses? We just did a survey with our prospective incoming freshman students, and we used the chatbot to do that, and we had over a 50% response 2 weeks ago. That's pretty amazing response rate. None of us is getting that response rate with emails. You know, students aren't necessarily responding to individual texts like that, but they're used to communicating with our chatbot. The other thing that we do, and where we've had quite a bit of success, is building community with our chatbot. Our chatbot is called W, and you'll meet W on the next slide. But really what we want to do is have the opportunity to create a fun engagement with students where they want to interact. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is W. W is actually our student mascot. And why we named our chatbot that, there's a couple of things that are really cool about W. And you can see some of the response rates that we had from students. So we were able to engage with more first-generation students. We engaged with a lot of students from a variety of backgrounds. We also saw more students who were Pell eligible. But why we like W is, and I think it's important if you are considering creating a chatbot, is that W is non-binary. So W doesn't have a gender. W is multilingual and can interact with students in a variety of different languages. It all happens via text. And then I'm gonna, you know, so we infuse a lot of W's personality in this, but Kurt, if you wanna give just a little bit about the technology side of W, I always like to focus on the fun and leave the hard work to someone else.
It definitely is fun. Sure. Yeah, so basically W is a virtual advisor that we're putting in students' hands so they can access 24/7 to get immediate responses to their questions about Wayne State. And we also help Dawn and her team proactively reach out to those prospective students to gather feedback, like she said, on these very conversational surveys that drive high student engagement, as well as walking them through processes like applying for financial aid, registering for orientation, etc. These chatbots are platform agnostic. A lot of institutions, including Dawn's at Wayne State, interacts with students over text message, which is where we see the highest engagement, but they're also available on a website via chat platform and social media as well. So that's sort of a high level overview of what a chatbot is as a virtual advisor, but I'll kick it back to Dawn.
Okay, so as I mentioned, we did start our chatbot engagement in 2017. And as I said, we do believe that that helped us bring in the largest freshman class in 2018 and the second largest in 2019. One of the things I want to mention as we transition to the next slide is we have found students who are asking questions of W that they would not ask of a person. And so they're willing to, ask about disability services or, tell us things that maybe are kind of personal, because students are very comfortable with this technology and they know that it's not a real person, but they can still get their questions answered. So at this point, W has interacted with over 45,000 students since we first launched. And you can see that W's been very active and has sent quite a few messages to students. And we have a very low opt-out rate, which I also think is indicative of the technology, that students are comfortable with it and they're not necessarily choosing to disengage. We also have messages that students have sent to W in response to campaigns or questions where we have asked. And then when Laura and Kirk and I talked about this platform, I also thought it was really important, the number 300. Those are the messages that W couldn't answer. So when you launch a chatbot, you help build a whole database of questions, but then there are always questions that, will stump W as W learns. And so it was really important to us, and we were really concerned about the level of staff engagement it would take, the amount of time it would take to launch this. And you can see, given the volume of communication that we've had with students, there have been very few messages that were actually escalated to our staff. And I will tell you that the messages that were escalated did require deeper conversations with students, and we were really happy to have those. Next slide. So here are just some examples of some of the conversations that W has with students. One of the first ones in the middle: how do I know if I'm accepted? Will I receive an email if I'm accepted? Can you tell me about scholarships? And then you get down to the bottom: how's your day? And W's responding back. So what I always share with people is, it's not taking away the interactions and the conversations that your staff would have with students. But the example that I like to give often is, imagine if W can answer the standard, what is your FAFSA code, versus being able to answer, hey, I don't know which documents I really need for verification. So if you can free up your staff to not have to respond to what is your FAFSA code, then they have time to go and do those deeper dives with students and really support them. Do you have this program? How do you do this? What kind of GPA? What are your admission? Those repetitive questions, because we are not seeing students really be willing to go out onto the website and search that information. They really like the interactivity of the chatbot and texting back and forth to get real response in real time. They know it's not a real person. They're okay with that. I think people my age were a little more freaked out by that. But students do enjoy that conversation. So the next one, these are some of the things that we've seen in the land of COVID. And I know that Kirk is going to spend some more time talking to you about this, but this has been a real time saver for us. So we all have a web page out where we talk about COVID responses, where we answer questions, where we have FAQs. But students, again, aren't necessarily spending their time going out and looking for that information, but they are texting our W chatbot. We've had students who want to know, is it too late to go ahead and apply or register? I'm sure all of us have had students, I don't know if I'm ready to come in this fall, or if it's going to be virtual, I don't know if that's where I need to be. So how can I withdraw my acceptance of admission? And while that might be a scary thing for some enrollment managers to have that conversation with students, I think all of us know that those are the valuable conversations we need to be having. And so W can answer a few of those questions, But then what we do is we go back and we have follow-up with students. And so that's been really important because, again, those general questions get answered very quickly in real time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You all know that our students keep very different hours than we do. Also, because they don't have to be up for school, they're asking questions at 3 a.m. We don't have staff available to answer that, but they're still getting a response. So that's been a really valuable tool for us, especially during this time in working with our incoming students, just to try and help them be calm and make sure that their questions are getting answered in real time. So Kirk, if you want to talk a little bit more about COVID and what that's meant as far as AdmitHub and technology.
Sure. Yeah. Speaking of students asking questions at 3 a.m., I had to talk to my own daughter, who's a high school junior, who was doing that exact thing last night in the middle of the night and keeping me awake. So we're definitely seeing that across the board. Before we actually dive into the COVID insights, I want to make sure that if anyone is interested in learning more about our chatbots and services for your institution, that we have the opportunity to reach out. So you should all see a poll come up on your screen right now, and we'll give you a minute just for folks to respond before we move on. All right, and then now we're going to turn our attention to cover some of the actionable data and insights from our COVID-19 support chatbots on what students are asking right now. So when the coronavirus escalated over a month ago, our team developed a free chatbot for your website that can answer incoming questions about the coronavirus. And the bot's knowledge base is pre-filled with, oh, actually, if we can get to the next slide. The bot's knowledge base is pre-filled with information from the CDC, from the World Health Organization, and other medical professionals. And website visitors can ask the bot coronavirus-related questions and get answers 24/7 in over 150 languages. Now, these support chatbots are active right now at more than 50 higher ed and government websites. And for anyone who hasn't taken advantage of this yet, we're dropping a link in the chat right now with more information where you can request a free account. And in terms of the data, in order to help provide better insight for all of us working with students, we evaluated over 250,000 student messages across all of our COVID bots, as well as our partner institutions. So we looked at 250,000 messages that mapped to 137,000 unique conversation topics. This was over 5 weeks of data from March 22nd through last Friday. And these messages were examined across multiple platforms, including text message and web chats. And one of the trends that we saw first in the data is around health and safety concerns. In the first weeks of the outbreak, students were most concerned with testing and treatment on campus, along with general knowledge about the coronavirus. In order for schools to be successful in the fall, they need to be prepared for clearly communicated COVID best practices alongside solutions for wellness in a virtual or mixed education environment. And as you can see, these conversations about mental health have been greatly increasing. So universities may consider offering additional resources to help students with the increased mental burden of learning, often socially distanced from peers and support networks, and sometimes with health concerns for that support network. Dawn, I know when we were talking yesterday, you had mentioned a story from your own institution about being able to pinpoint a certain number of students who were struggling and being able to then reach out to them to support them. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about that?
No, one of the things we talked about, as I'm sure many other institutions did, we have our Dean of Students who's sending out messages, our Student Success team, our Counseling Center, but we did a quick kind of push of this instance of the chatbot out to students. And we actually reached some students who hadn't engaged with any of those other platforms. And one of the students was really, struggling with, not understanding where and how to go get help. And so it was just really evidence to me that no matter how many different ways we're getting information out to students, that there are still some students who are falling through those. And I had another example of it just this morning in talking with one of our staff members where somebody didn't know necessarily they had failed the test and it's finals week. They were really upset. And even though we sent out a whole bunch of information about disability support services, the first time they heard about it was through the chatbot. And so I think that's just important to know that your students are open to receiving and getting information in a whole variety of different ways. And there's an old thing, just because you're putting it out there doesn't mean they're picking it up. And I think that that's what's happening. Just because we're putting it out there in one venue doesn't mean that they're actually getting it. So we've been really grateful for this level and this type of engagement, that we can drop down and monitor and pinpoint individual students and provide support. And in an institution that has 27,000 students, for us to be able to have that kind of granular connection with students is invaluable.
Great, thanks, Dawn. So moving on, we saw that requests for refunds have decreased after the initial wave of campus facilities closing. Inquiries around tuition payments, scholarships available, and at-risk work-study programs are now trending upwards as students are turning their attention to the fall semester. And students are also asking more questions about the potential benefits or ramifications of deferring admission or withdrawing, as Dawn had mentioned earlier. Dawn, is this similar to what you're seeing at Wayne State? I know you mentioned that as a potential story there.
Yeah, so it's very typical. In some of the interactions that we had with students, we were able then to take and elevate to leadership, so that we could actually share with them in real time what the concerned students were coming forward. You know, what does it mean to have a chemistry lab fee if a student actually isn't going to be in a chemistry physical lab? And so us being able to share, hey, students are concerned about this, they're concerned about paying this, really was able to give real-time information to our leadership as they were, you know, working to adjust and make those types of decisions.
Thanks, Dawn. Another hot topic was around, obviously, the application season, admissions and season as well. So understandably, we're seeing an increasing number of questions from students around application and deposit deadlines. Questions like, will the deadline be moved to deposit after May 1? Will schools go test optional? How will you factor testing into admissions? And students are also concerned about having their transcripts being sent on time with schools being closed. An additional 6% of all questions are about when campus will reopen, and schools that can bring clarity to what the campus experience will look like next fall will help students make their decision in a timely manner. Also, students are looking for clarity around academics in a virtual or potentially mixed media classroom setting. So they're becoming more concerned about what this experience is going to be like for them in fall 2020. Questions around virtual learning have actually doubled in the past 5 weeks. Students also want to know, as Dawn had mentioned, you know, how lab-based classes are going to work. Will courses be pass-fail? What are the ramifications of how grading may be impacted for students in a new online or mixed learning environment? This is a new environment for students in terms of how they are learning, and how might their grading systems be different? And though some of these questions are small in volume, they're still deeply important to the students asking them. So ensuring that you're addressing these issues as directly and as promptly as you're able to is imperative to serving this incoming class. So based on these insights, we developed a number of recommendations. And so as we know, the enrollment process is more challenging than ever to navigate right now, with changing deadlines, quarantine uncertainty, mixed testing availability, and difficulty separating rumor from truth, quite honestly. So colleges that resource additional communication efforts will be more successful in engaging these prospective students. So here are a few recommendations based on the insights that we gleaned. Making COVID-19 campus safety policies clear and accessible to prospective students. Surveys like Dawn had mentioned that are conversational in nature, that invite the back and forth, that invite higher participation rate, will help you get a real-time pulse for where your prospective students have immediate concerns and able to address them or escalate them to the proper staff on campus. Clarity around what the campus experience will look like while staying safe will also help students weigh their enrollment decisions. And investing in timely communication around relevant concerns to prospective students, including campus openings, classroom dynamics, changes to enrollment processes, and lastly, student concerns around their health and well-being, along with other blockers and barriers to enrolling this fall. So as a summary, we synthesized all this data for you. It includes the top 5 topics of questions asked and the several keywords, the examples around those topics. There will actually be a full report we'll be sending to all registrants, which will be available at the end of May. with additional insights, data, and details. And I know this is a lot of data to digest right now. So in the interest of time, we're going to move on, but we'll be sending this presentation to you after the webinar as well. So to help schools and students through what's sure to be a challenging summer, we are also going to be introducing a new program called Ollie for All. Ollie is the chatbot's name, and this is a program that is also completely free this summer, where the team at AdmitHub will be sending text message reminders to your students. It's slightly different than W at Wayne State University because it wouldn't provide university-specific information, but the campaigns and the content that are developed are around our research-backed strategies and nudges to help students enroll or return to school this fall. So schools who choose to participate will securely share their student contact information, and then we take it from there. You'll also receive monthly pulse reports to see how students are engaging with the bot, along with their sentiments, their questions, their concerns, etc. So we really want to be here to help you. We designed the COVID bot as well. And this Ollie for All program is something that we would like to offer everyone throughout the summer. We're offering priority setup for today's webinar attendees. And so if you're interested in learning more, there should be a poll right on your screen. You can click yes, and we'll give that a minute as well. And also just a reminder that you can ask questions through the Q&A box as well. And we'll try to get to those as we open up the discussion. All right, so I think at this point, we've given you a lot of information and a lot of data and insights, but we really wanted to take the next bit of time to open up a more general discussion, to chat with Dawn about what's going on her campus, how procedures and policies might be changing, how she's communicating with students, and also to hear from all of you as well, what your concerns are, what your questions are, and how we can help and how Dawn can help as well. So again, feel free to start asking questions in the Q&A section. But Dawn, maybe I'll just open it up to you to ask just how you've seen on your campus certain enrollment processes may have been changing and how students are coping with them.
So I think probably the one that everybody is experiencing right now is the fact that students cannot take the ACT or SAT. And so that's been a big kind of changer, because we often have a lot of first-gen students who take that April test, or people who are trying to boost that final, score to get in. And so we've had issues there, students being able to get documents. So there are students who have been unable to provide us with certain documents when it comes to verification. And so looking at how we relax those and making sure that we're being supportive of students. In the state of Michigan right now, I was talking to my husband, you renew your driver's license in the month of your birthday, and you also renew your car tags in the month of your birthday. My birthday is in May, and at this point, if we don't open back up, my driver's license will expire, as will my car tags. And so there's all these little things that, depending on where you are physically within the United States, we are experiencing these things at different levels and different issues for our students. I also think the fact that a lot of us have out-of-state students who are trying to figure it out. If I have a student right now who is coming to Wayne State from Idaho, their experience with COVID-19 is very different, and their systems are very different as far as the level of openness than what they may be experiencing at my institution when they come here. And so having the opportunity to engage with students and let them know what it is like here versus what it is like where they are has also been very helpful, to try and manage some of those campus processes and have students understand why it may take an extra day or two, because we actually have to physically send someone to pick up the mail on our campus, take it to their home, scan it, and then us process things, not how we were doing in 2020, but probably much more like we were doing in 2010. Mm-hmm. And so having students understand that has been a challenge.
What about, I'm sure that a lot of your students are having financial concerns. And so what type of messaging are you putting out there to students? What type of communication are you hearing back from students in order to ease their concerns about financing their education?
So a lot of things that we've done, we've extended some scholarship deadlines, we've extended some FAFSA deadlines, we've pushed back our deposit deadline to June 1, as a lot of our peer institutions have done. We also have had a lot of current students who've been very interested in asking a lot of questions about the CARES Act funding. And so as we've been getting information about that, trying to make sure that that information is provided in real time. One of the things that W does help us do with students is really walk them through that verification process. And so that has been a huge time saver in, you know, a student knowing what the next step is, or they can text or go, hey, I sent this in, what's my next step? And so W's able to do that and free up my staff to actually do a lot more in-depth work with students. I think that the other thing is students are emotionally uncertain about the fall as well. And so being able to take the simple questions off and connect with students in more real time and more person to person has helped us a lot. I don't think that we could have managed you know, that volume of calls or information if we hadn't had our W chatbot.
And something that I've been really curious about is just kind of following student interest in deferring admission or taking a gap year. Have you seen any trends in that regard, or have you noticed anything in talking with peers about what that landscape might look like this year?
So again, I think it depends geographically where you are in the US. And then I also believe that it depends on how many of your students come from the local area versus how many of your students are coming out of state. So I think you're going to see institutions that have large out-of-state populations maybe experience higher deferments than what they were expecting or what they had hoped would happen, because students, again, they just don't feel like they have enough information to necessarily make those decisions about, should I go away to school, will my school be open, and how I can do those things. You saw some of the questions that we shared earlier. Students are really seeking kind of that final answer about, will you be open in the fall? I think for a lot of us, we have faculty members and staff members. I think, you know, I know that if we had leadership that could actually type a question to a chatbot that would give us the right answer for what it's going to look like in the fall, I think a lot of us would take advantage of that. So students are very optimistic. I think sometimes about the questions that our chatbot can answer. And so we have to manage some of those expectations as well. But I think we will see higher gap years at some institutions. I think that we will have students maybe start closer to home, depending on where they live and what those expectations are. And again, I think it depends on geographically where you are.
Yeah, that makes sense. And time will tell, I'm sure. And I'm wondering how this might affect the junior class as well, after this senior class is looking at making their enrollment decisions too. So actually related to that, a question just came in on the Q&A about if you have any advice or tips for high school counselors during the summer transition for their graduating seniors.
I just have to tell you, I have seen amazing high school counselors over the course of the past 6 weeks, putting signs in yards, holding virtual graduations, you know, having adopt a senior programs where communities are coming together to support students. And again, I think always keeping the focus on what comes and what is, as opposed to mourning what wasn't. And I read an amazing article about someone whose high school graduation was completely it just didn't happen because of Hurricane Katrina. And so they had written, you know, what does this mean this many years? And I think all of us can look back on experiences that we missed out on, but there were other things that happened. And so any of the time that I think high school counselors can just reassure their seniors. At Wayne State, we did a platform where we actually actually met with parents and helped them guide their seniors through a decision-making process in a difficult time. So again, anything that we can do to connect human to human, which is really interesting that we're having that in a conversation about AI,
Right.
I think is going to allow us to soothe those worries of students.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that about the connection from humans to humans, especially in a virtual landscape and using technology like this and AI. I've heard from some colleagues that a lot of the decision day events, virtual events that they are now planning and hosting as a change to their traditional on-campus events have actually been very successful, because a lot more students who might not have traditionally been able to visit campus are now able to take part in them and have conversations with faculty and the president and your team, et cetera. Have you kind of seen similar success?
Oh, we have. I mean, to do town halls where, you have the president and all the leadership and you have students there and anybody can ask a question. And so that has led to, kind of a whole flattening of that communication line. I had a student who just, emailed me on Saturday. They had some questions. That's not usually the level of interaction that I have with students, but it's welcome, because we want to make sure that we are connecting with them and helping them feel good about a situation that I think none of us have certainty about.
Yeah, for sure. And there were a couple of questions came in on using the chatbot to support current students as well in terms of persistence, aside from prospective students. And I want to give you a chance to talk about that. I was going to mention this at the end, but if you're interested, for attendees, we're also hosting another webinar tomorrow on COVID insights related to persistence and retention. That will be hosted by our CEO, Drew Magliazzi, Tim Rennick from Georgia State University, and Lindsay Page from the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. Page ran a recent randomized control trial at Georgia State and collaborated with us and GSU on persistence, on the effectiveness of chatbot technology on persistence. So some very interesting results there. And Laura will put the link to that in the chat at some point. But Dawn, maybe just to pass it back to you about using a chatbot to connect with current students during this time as well, and supporting them along their journey.
So we took advantage of the Ollie COVID opportunity and kind of what I would consider the beta testing of some of that. And it was really, again, interesting, the things that students will talk about with the chatbot. I'm scared, or the interesting, what if my roommate's sick? That's the thing, to think that that's the question that you're going to reach out to a chatbot. But yeah, we were able to, talk with folks about our health services and where you get testing and how to self-isolate. Even if you haven't actually tested positive, you just appear that you are symptomatic. And so with very short implementation time and very little staff oversight, we were able to do that and glean some real information. And Kirk, as we were going through here, somebody had asked about instituting a chatbot when they have a small staff. Mm-hmm. And I think for us, I'm in a large institution, but I do not have a large staff. I have 8 admission counselors.
Which dog is that, Dawn?
Huh? Which
dog is that? I had mentioned before the webinar started, if one of Dawn's 5 dogs enters the scene, she should prop he or she up to the webinar and introduce him.
No, I muted them, so it's just there was a squirrel outside. So
I mean, completely understandable.
So I love the fact that this is where we are in the world right now.
Yeah.
I have 8 admission counselors, and we have, as I said, 27,000 students. So what has been probably the best thing for us is it doesn't take that much staff time to implement. So we literally created a bucket of questions, and this is for the technologically savvy people, but we built a bucket of questions. And then each time a student would ask a question, if the answer wasn't in the bucket, we had support from AdmitHub who would, I know, thank you, John. Yes, that's where we are. They would go back, and AdmitHub would help glean some of that information from our website and try and answer those questions. And if it wasn't satisfactory, then that's where those questions came back to our staff. So it really was not that heavy of a lift for what we got on the back end and what returned. And so we have one person who was kind of the main contact for that. And then they had a student worker who also helped answer those questions and figure out things. So it was easier to do than what I anticipated it would be. And so W is for prospective students. And then we tried the OLLI COVID current student aspect as part of one of the test sites to help, kind of gather that information and work. But we are actually exploring the option to take W for our current students as well. Mm-hmm. So we are interested in that retention aspect because we have been working a lot on retention. We've grown our graduation rates. And we had the fastest improving graduation rates in the nation, but we still have room to improve, and we think that this might be a way for us to do that.
That's great. Yeah, actually, another institution that we work with just came to mind in terms of retention at West Texas A&M. They were seeing their persistence at a very level or set level for decades. Really, it hadn't budged. And after they implemented their chatbot on campus, they saw 2 successive years of retention increases. Similar findings we're seeing with the Georgia State RCT that we'll highlight in the webinar tomorrow that you can learn more. And it's interesting to note that while these chatbots that we develop are primarily built for college audiences like Dawn at Wayne State, I know we're getting some questions about the use at high schools or other organizations, and we'd be happy to connect to see if the program is a good fit for you and your students as well. Let's see.
There have been a couple questions. Somebody asked about a timeline for implementation.
Yep.
When we used the timeline, we aimed for 6 weeks. And the very first thing you need to realize is when you implement a chatbot is it has to learn as it goes. So that initial time frame was for us to really build the questions and kind of the answer database that it's going to bounce against. And then we continue to add to it ongoing. And then somebody else talked about the fact, given graduate level programs or questions, we answer a lot of questions that could easily be implemented for graduate students as well. So there is a possibility to do that. Once you get down into the more major specific or research-oriented questions, you probably would need a little more human interaction to really get to that level of specificity. And it might not be worth the chatbot and like, what is your physics research area at the PhD level looking at? That's probably going to be a little too specific for the chatbot.
Yeah, and there was also a question that I can handle about seeing any differences in themes in questions for students at the community college level, and if community colleges are using this type of technology. And we have a number of community colleges that we work with who've seen similar success. Ocean County College in New Jersey is one example, and there's actually a case study on our website about how they implemented their chatbot program to boost both fall and summer enrollment successively in the first year of deployment. I don't know off the top of my head about any COVID specific insights related to community colleges, but we can dig into that and perhaps provide that in the final report at the end of May. Let's see, other questions you've seen, Dawn, that you want to answer?
I'm looking at this point to see if there are any others.
Well, while we were doing that and looking at more questions, we want to launch this final poll to see if you'd like any more information about anything that you've heard about here today, and feel free to click off as many as you'd like if you'd like more information. And one other thing that we wanted to provide you with in today's webinar is an opportunity to chat with W at Wayne State, and to see what it's like from a student perspective if you haven't had that experience before. Once the poll is off, we can flip the slide, and you can feel free to text that number. It's important to note this instance of W the Warrior is not the COVID response instance. It's their traditional enrollment chatbot. So we put in a number of potential questions that you may ask. Of course, feel free to chat with W and play around with it, as students will do, and ask questions that your students might be seeing as well. But we wanted to just give you, this is probably one of the few presentations where we actually encourage you to play on your phones. So feel free to have fun with that as we're answering some more questions.
So Lisa had asked, how often does our chatbot send messages? And I think it's important, your chatbot can send messages as often as you like. We try to not overuse the technology. So we may do kind of like a check-in with folks. Obviously, during this time frame, we've been having a little more interaction, but it's important to remember, we can send out a poll anytime we want, or we can send out a question. But the better thing is that students can text us anytime they want. So, and I think that's important because that way students are kind of driving some of that engagement as well.
Let's see, looking for other questions that popped up here. How about, I'm curious, Don, if since you've been working with W for more than one season, and maybe this is, obviously, since the world has gone topsy-turvy after the first season, if you've changed anything in terms of how you've used W to engage with your students, or if you're still using it in the same vein as you did in that first season.
I would say we're actually more sophisticated in our use of it than maybe what we were previously. And just, before, where we might have taken more time to do lengthier surveys or whatever, now we can just kind of, pop a quick survey off. We can engage with the student. We can, send out a quick text, ask students about how they're, what are you thinking about this? Or did you see that email that we sent? Or so we're using it more because we're seeing that students are responding quicker. Obviously, they're not in school, and I think they're even more tied to their devices now than maybe what they previously were. It also asked about, somebody asked about international students and if they respond. We sit in Detroit, and so we have a lot of folks who live in Canada. And so for us, we do have a lot of international students who live in Canada who respond to those questions quite frequently and ask them. And I do want to hit the point that we talked about several slides ago, is the fact that this gives us multilingual ability without having to have a staff member, respond in the language that the student texts us. So that has also been a big boon for us because we do have students who speak a variety of languages.
And I noticed that WhatsApp was a question on the same question, and that is coming. So we're waiting for WhatsApp to release their business API. And as I mentioned before, the bot is platform agnostic. So any platform that has an API, we're able to integrate with. And really, the bottom line is we want to engage students where they are. Right now, that is typically, well, at least for domestic students, that's over text message. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing the highest engagement rates there. But obviously for students like international, a platform like WhatsApp or WeChat might be very beneficial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's see, I'm not sure if there are any last questions. There was a question about CRMs. Maybe that can be the last question as we wrap up, but what CRMs do we work with? And we're able to integrate with really any CRM via secure SFTP, although we did just build a fully integrated Salesforce integration. Salesforce is also a recent investor in ours. So the collaboration was mutually beneficial, and we're able to now provide a deeper integration with schools that are using Salesforce. But we're able to, again, to integrate with a number of CRMs or SISs if you're working with current students as well. So let's see.
The other thing that I think it's interesting, because like we're a slate school,
Yeah.
and so we are able to build those campaigns out and then send them out as part of this. But I wouldn't let whatever CRM system you have hold you back from being able to integrate this, because it's just the same way as if you were doing individual text messages or if you were doing a mailing or anything, you could still track it through this.
Great. Dawn, any final words of advice or sage wisdom as we're heading into May for all the folks that are working so hard to support students?
So my first of all, thank you for highlighting sage advice as my gray roots grow out. So you and I had this great conversation yesterday. But the thing I will do is we've been talking a lot on my staff about just keep swimming. So in finding Nemo and Dory. So we're just going to keep swimming. I think that's all any of us can do because we don't know what things look like on the other side. And so I wouldn't have any kind of fatalistic thoughts about what's not going to happen. I think things are just going to continue to evolve. And you know what? Enrollment management and admissions folks, if we know anything, is we know how to pivot, and we know how to adapt, and we know how to adjust. And so I think that admissions folks and enrollment managers, I think we're going to be just fine. And I know that our students are going to be just fine because they're even younger, more resilient, and more embracing of all of this technology.
Thanks, Dawn. Well, I have a great deal of respect and admiration for what you do and for what all of you do who've joined us here today. Thank you so much for your time, especially during this challenging crisis. And we would love to be able to help more students, and we'd love to chat with you if anything is interested in you further. So feel free to reach out. We'll also send out this recording to attendees. And again, at the end of May, we'll have a fuller, is that a word? More full insights?
I don't know, but I do need to ask if you'll edit out my dogs.
Done. So thank you all so much for joining today. Again, if you'd like to attend the retention webinar, that is tomorrow with Georgia State University and our CEO, Drew Magliazzi. So thank you so much. Dawn, thank you very much for your time today, and have a great week.
Bye, y'all.